And welcome everyone to Rock M Radio. This is the beginning of a brand new episode of Dive Cuts, and we are live on YouTube for Rock M Plus subscribers. It's season 8, still in the late stages of season 8. Here to talk about your Missouri Basketball Tigers, as the only podcast strictly talking about the Mizzou Basketball Tigers. I'm your host, Sam Snelling. If you are watching on YouTube, you can see me on your left. Actually, I believe I'm on the right this time, which is a little weird. I think because I added you first. Anyway, it's not Matt Harris tonight. It's somebody else. We've got this this lawyer type at Data Mizzou all the way down there in Glendale, and representing the verdict on Dive Cuts tonight. Matt, how are you?
Doing good. No complaints at this juncture. So I'm ready to talk some Mizzou basketball. It's been a little bit since I've been on a podcast, and it's been a long while since I've been on a podcast with someone else. I think the last one was with Jim Root, if I recall, in the middle of February. Usually it's been me flying solo, so it's nice to not have to talk straight for 25 minutes about whatever is plaguing or making Mizzou fans feel good.
Yeah, so for those who are, I guess maybe not Rock M Plus subscribers, but are subscribers to this podcast feed, you're getting this either post-release on YouTube or through your regular podcast feed. You may not be aware that Mr. Watkins spends once a week, spends about 20-30 minutes diving into film and talking about the Tigers. And what we used to do on Rock M Nation, which was the verdict, which is sort of like a heavy stats and video post. You're now doing it fully video style, thanks to some plugins from Synergy. We can queue up the video pretty easily. That's been going really well. I think I've really enjoyed the series. You are maybe not the most energetic presenters. I'm sure you've heard that before. But the information is fantastic. And so for now, like, the verdict is on hold until we at least get closer to the season. Is that right?
Yeah, we might do some fun things with it in the off season. We'll see. Maybe a good opportunity to dive into some transfer additions or returning player situations. But Matt Harris does a lot of that on the website, so I don't want to step on his toes too much. And I'm sure everyone gets tired of seeing my face and would rather just get the goods.
Yeah, I think
the source, but
everyone does seem to like the video, and our access to Synergy, I think, has been a bit of a boon. Well, let's dive in on the Tigers here. Enough about ourselves, and I want to start. We kind of did this last time, starting with defections. So Missouri's roster wasn't expected to undergo like a whole lot of transition, and sure enough, they've largely kind of avoided any kind of like major hits. There's definitely, I think, like guys you didn't want to see enter the portal. For me, like I was kind of hoping, like Marcus Allen would stick around. He transferred. But since we last spoke, at least with Matt Harris on Dive Cuts a couple weeks ago, Peyton Marshall also entered the transfer portal. For those who are not on the forums today, not on Twitter today, you may not know, but Peyton Marshall actually committed to play at Georgia Tech next season. So he's kind of going back home. I know a lot of what was made of the family ties to St. Louis, but Marshall is an Atlanta area kid, and so he's going back home to play for Georgia Tech. Watkins, as far as like what Missouri lost, I know you're not like the biggest Marshall guy, but you weren't. I mean, you weren't exactly like shooting fireworks that he was leaving the roster. What is it that Missouri lost in your take?
Yeah, to preface it, I would say of the three of us, I was probably the lowest on Marshall when he signed, or when he committed, I guess is a better terminology for it, out of high school. I questioned the fit somewhat early. When you look at how Mizzou wants to play, especially defensively, I think you're looking for a little bit more mobile big men than what Peyton Marshall offered. But on the other hand, he was pretty skilled offensively. So to me, it was like I wasn't the biggest fan of signing him initially, but once he was in the system and once they made the commitment to working with his coaches at Overtime Elite to working himself into where he would be in the offense at Mizzou, and then you sink a year of development time into it, I think at that point I would have preferred to see him stay just because you've already invested so much in him. On the other hand, I think the hangups once he got here, not schematically, but once he got here, was that he just simply wasn't there in terms of conditioning to be able to play enough. And perhaps another season in the weight room would have changed that, because he has done a remarkable job of getting himself into better shape than what he was before. So that's possible. But I think the question was that even if he is good enough, how much can you rely on him to play for extended periods of time? And the answer to that this year was not much at all. I mean, we're talking 2-3 minute stretches max. So, what I'm disappointed in losing is being able to see the bounce of the standard or expected progression from the freshman to sophomore year, and we're not going to see that. But on the other hand, I think that somewhat was capped due to physical limitations and how much he'd be able to play, unless he made pretty big strides into getting into better shape and being better conditioned for next year. So, I can see it both ways.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a large part of it that was going to have to see Peyton make strides, in his in his endurance on the floor in order to kind of be seen as a larger contributor. I do think that there was a spot for him on the roster next year, and I do think that there was a spot for him to be a contributor next year, and more so than he was this year. Look, I know that he played, but he didn't really play much. He wasn't a part of the rotation so much as he was a guy who sort of sees some spot minutes here and there, guy who wasn't afraid to, run through some Florida bigs or something like that. But when it came to the sustainability of him kind of being on the floor, you weren't really going to see, I don't necessarily think it was going to be a sea change from this year to next year of Peyton, being a guy who could, be on the floor for, an entire, TV timeout window, which, you think about it from that standpoint, a guy who can't, quite make it through 4 minutes of action, then that does become sort of a problem. And also, like a lot of young bigs, he was prone to foul trouble. I did like the offensive skill. I thought that, a lot was kind of made of his passing from some scouts. I know that we kind of, were able to look at, and there's definitely some questionable decision making in some of his passing, which led to some turnovers as a prep. But you could see the flashes this year within the offense and why he kind of made sense as that, that high post distributor, and being that kind of wide body that he is, he's a guy that's so difficult to sort of run off. It is something that he is not going to, or was never going to be able to provide them what they want defensively, which is a guy who, maybe you're not switching comfortably onto point guards, but you're a guy who can switch, and at least, hold your own, against some wings and stuff like that. And, he's strictly with his foot speed. I just don't know that you're really going to improve that all that much. That's just a a physical trait of some guys. He's just a guy who's going to have to play a lot of drop coverage, and maybe you can get out and kind of hedge, but he's not a switchable type big. And I think for what Missouri wants to do defensively, you're probably looking at longer stretches of zone, which I know I'm not the biggest fan of, so I think it makes a lot of sense to me why Peyton would maybe explore his options, and maybe look elsewhere, because look, Missouri's trying to do something next year that Georgia Tech is not really trying to do, right? And Georgia Tech being in the early stages of the ACC kind of being down, they're just trying to kind of build the program. And I think having I don't want to necessarily call him stable, but having a big physical guy like that around the block could do them a lot of good in the ACC. So to me, it kind of makes sense for him to leave. Makes sense for where he landed. I don't disagree with your take on some of his limitations, but I do think that you definitely want more guys to kind of stay in, and also like on the guys who left, we also got word that Marcus Allen officially announced for Miami, which is a surprise to nobody. Anyone that was paying attention anyway. So that's CY is now the assistant coach of Miami. He was kind of the guy who's responsible for bringing Allen along. This is not me saying that CY stole Marcus Allen. This is not that situation. You always commit to a head coach, but it definitely once Allen went home for spring break, and you sort of heard that he was kind of getting some run down at home with guys in Miami, and that's where he's from. So I get it. And also the way that the roster is stacking up, there may not be a whole lot of minutes at the 4 spot. So let's kind of turn our attention to who's been added, because I know that. So since we last podcasted, we had just gotten word that Sebastian Mack had committed, Luke Northweather had committed, Javon Porter was already on board. But since then, Missouri has also added Shawn Phillips. And so Shawn Phillips actually committed the same day that Marshall entered the portal. Again, let's not read too much into that. It takes a couple days to process paperwork. And so even though it was announced on Sunday, clearly earlier in the week, Missouri knew that Peyton was intending on transferring. They were already in pursuit of Shawn Phillips, and Phillips committed. So 7 foot, pretty athletic dude. Watkins, tell us about Shawn Phillips.
Well, he's big. He's experienced. He's a 7-footer, if not close to it. I think he's probably. I don't want to hail the Josh Gray comparison out of laziness, because that's exactly what it is. But I think in terms of role, he will be similar. He's a different player than Josh Gray. He's a little bit more leaner, a little bit more mobile. Not quite as big of a physical presence inside, but in the same vein, I don't think he's going to be anyone who you're running your offense through. I think unlike Josh, he's a little bit more adept at playing in ball screens. He's a little bit better rolling to the basket, but in terms of playing on the block, handling outside, shooting, you're not really getting any of that with Phillips. Defensively, he's fine. The fact that the news of Shawn Phillips coming in and Peyton Marshall going out came within an hour of one another was kind of like how do you feel about this? And to me, it's kind of like, you got a guy who can contribute next year, and you traded him for the mystery box. We know what Shawn Phillips is, and we've talked about the mystery box before. It's the Family Guy scene where Peter's got he wins the boat, And they say, you could trade the boat for the mystery box. And he's like, well, yeah, I want the mystery box because it could be anything like a boat.
Yeah.
You've got the boat or you've got the mystery box. And in this case, it's like Peyton is more of the mystery to me. There's probably a lower downside and a higher upside, whereas Shawn Phillips, you know what you're going to get. And that's a role player. He's big, but I think to me, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, but, I see Trent Pierce and Javon Porter playing some of the five, or at least playing in the front court with Mark Mitchell, whoever you want to call the five's the five, but those is the front court. There's always the issue of Trent Burns, who we haven't seen since, no one's seen him except for the people who went to the exhibition game, of which I was one of them. And I was impressed, but he's raw, so you've got all of these options, but you don't really have an answer at this point to me. So Shawn Phillips doesn't really answer any questions that I have about what they're going to do there, but he does give them another option.
Yeah, it's basically like, with Josh Gray, what you got was a guy who could rebound, he could defend, and not really much else. They got him to the point where he was like solid, on some handoffs. But anytime they were sort of running like delay and he had to have the ball more than like 2 or 3 seconds, like I was just pleading with him not to dribble the basketball. And those are all things that usually kind of ended badly. He's a physical guy. He's able to kind of, do some positive things around the rim. But he's not a finisher. And I think what you're getting with Phillips is you're getting somebody who's got a little more bounce. He's a little bit better right at the rim. A little more spring, as you can see on the video here. But he's also a little bit of a downgrade defensively. So, there isn't, for what Missouri was kind of looking to pay, you're not really, you're not really getting the perfect player. And I think like that's part of the issue that you're getting, when you have to kind of hunt for these sort of like replacement level bigs, is there's always going to be some level of drawback. And for Phillips, the drawback is, okay, like he's able to do this. He's able to, rim run and dunk the basketball. But he's a reliable rebounder. Like, I don't think he's the plus rebounder that Gray was. And he's not horrible defensively. He's also coming from Arizona State, which has certainly had some questionable roster composition. Before that, he was at LSU. Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
So I don't want to say like it's not like he can't provide them what they need, but I think the thing that I agree with you, and that when you look at the size of the roster and the guys that are like in that 3, 4, 5 range, I'm like Trent Pierce and Mark Mitchell started like more than half the season together, and that was your 4 or 5. As much as I'd like to, pigeonhole Mark at the 4, the reality is like he's going to have to slide down and play some small ball 5. Javon Porter, same thing. Like he's going to have to play some 5. Trent Pierce, you're going to have to play some 5. Like all those guys are 6'9", 6'10", 6'11". So, I'm sorry guys, like you're big. Sometimes you're going to have to play the 5 spot. So I think when you're talking about, like Phillips might start, but I think it's probably going to be like a Gray situation where he maybe starts the season as a starter, but ultimately, like I think he's going to be a role guy off the bench, and I think that's something that really kind of fits him and suits him, and can be a positive thing. We got a little dog appearance there.
Yeah, the dog left during the Shawn Phillips conversation. I'm not
I
saying
feel you,
that
dog.
it's related, but she did. So
I mean, it's not related. Yeah. So like it is what it is. Like I'm not trying to um, make everybody sad about Shawn Phillips. He'll be fine. But as far as like, the additions that were important for them this offseason, or as what was it, is it Trilly that always says sometimes the best gets are the ones, that you already have or what, something like that. The biggest thing for Missouri was that, they're bringing back Ant and Mark, and those guys can be awesome. Now they're filling in around that. You're hoping for some growth, from Honor, from To. You're hoping Trent takes another step forward, and then you're hoping that like of the guys that you've added, like I think you kind of know what you're going to get in Sebastian Mack. But I think what you're hoping that the combination of Porter, Phillips, with Trent, is sort of enough. And then if you get like a nice sort of boost from Trent Burns, then hey, great, good news. Like that's what you
right.
want, So I think this sets up for them, fine. Because also, I think like Shawn Phillips is a guy who's not necessarily going to be, like a bad locker room presence because he's, starting and or not starting and only playing 15 minutes a night. Like it's kind of what he's accustomed to. So, you're getting a guy with that sort of expectation. So, Watkins, what's on the screen here?
Well, you mentioned returning players and continuity. So I decided to flash up some of my latest research on that exact topic. This is a post over on our board, which I'm happy to share with everyone now because no one knows what it's saying unless I tell them. There's a very good explainer in the thread, but this is basically what each team is bringing back production wise at this point in the offseason. And we've removed all of the NBA early entrants. We've removed all of the graduating seniors, or those out of eligibility, we should call them now, and all outgoing transfers. Those have all been stripped off of SEC rosters, and this is the result. The yellow column is my way of saying this is how you measure production, and this is how I'm measuring returning production. And as you can see up at the very top, Mizzou is number one, and by a pretty healthy margin. I calculated up that using this one metric here, that again, bit of a mystery box for any of you who are interested, come subscribe and you'll get to know all about it. There was what I call points above replacement, or PAR, PAR. I believe the total tally of all SEC players on SEC teams this year was around 357 points above replacement, and only 17% of that total is returning to the league next year. And Mizzou has over their share for sure, and I'm not going to count it all up right now, but yeah, I mean, Mizzou has 6 players that played last year. I believe I counted up today of the 28 players that played 10 or more minutes returning to the teams that they played on last year. Mizzou has 4 of them. So that gives you kind of an idea of how much production Mizzou is bringing back relative to the rest of the conference. So you had mentioned that in relation to Shawn Phillips coming into a team with quite a bit of retention, and here is your evidence of that.
Yeah, so one of the things that I also like to sort of point out, because you use BPR a little bit as like one of the indicators.
Right, Evan Maya's BPR, correct.
We are big fans of Evan Mia. So if you are not a subscriber to his site, go subscribe. I believe he has different tiers too, so you don't have to go full blown expert level like I've done. But yeah, but if you look at like the BPR, so Mia is really the only guy out there in the analytics field who's trying to sort of quantify defense, and that's why I think like using it for your par makes a lot of sense. The fourth highest player in BPR last year in the SEC was Ant Robinson. Now Ant, the one drawback of BPR, and this is why you've come up with par, is it doesn't necessarily quantify the amount of time that you're playing. So obviously, if you are a 29-minute, 30-minute type player, like Mark Mitchell's BPR is 5.87. And a lot of people, I would say that Mark Mitchell was a more valuable player for Missouri last year than Anthony Robinson. Now, when Anthony Robinson was playing well, he was doing a lot of really good things for Missouri. But Mark Mitchell was on the floor more offense went through Mitchell. And so his 5.87 is maybe a little bit more valuable than Ant's 7.28, but Ant was not on the floor as much either. Some of that is due to foul trouble. So par basically quantifies like how much you're actually
captured BPR.
Yeah.
How much of that value you're capturing, right?
Yeah. So like, Janai Broom is a guy who is on the floor a lot. His BPR is very high. His par will also be very high. Thomas Howe from Florida. The only guy returning to the SEC who is higher than Anthony Robinson. He is the highest returning player. So Watkins, as far as like who is coming back in the SEC and how many of those, because I think you have those as well. Like how many of like the top 30 or 40 players are actually returning to the SEC?
Yeah, I've got that information. It's not many. Now there are some guys who are currently in the NBA draft pool, which I expect to return. Josh Hubbard, for example, at Mississippi State. I don't think he's going to stick in the draft, but he's off the board for now because he's been declared. Of the top 50 players in our par calculations, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 returning out of the SEC. 6 of the top 50. So the turnover is going to be great. It's not only top to bottom turnover. The top is just getting eviscerated. And what's I think people need to realize is what made the SEC so great last year is they had so many good players. That's simple. But so many of those good players are now out of eligibility.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think like Janai Broom, 5th-year senior. He was the standard bearer of quality SEC players. When you thought of the best SEC player, he would come to mind. Same thing with Walter Clayton at Florida. Those type of guys. All of the SEC's good players, I shouldn't say all, most of the SEC's good
Most
players,
of them.
like a very, very high percentage were either seniors, 4th or 5th-year seniors, or freshmen that are going in the NBA. You had a few guys like Colin Murray Boyles, who is a sophomore, who's now going to the NBA. But by and large, it was very polarized, and so many of those guys are out of eligibility now. And we've got a full list of, I believe it was 195 players posted to the site with where all of them are going, whether they're out of eligibility, NBA draft, or the transfer portal. So many of those guys are gone. When I was putting this together, it was just jaw-dropping seeing like all of this red all over the board, gone, 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 gone. And you think Mizzou, like, okay, they bring back Anthony Robinson, who was, I think, 4th or 5th in minutes, Mark Mitchell, who was 2nd, maybe 1st, and then Trent Pierce and Jacob Cruz, who were down around, between 5th and 8th role players. And that is way more than anyone else is bringing back as far as the rotation. And it's not that Mizzou is exceptional in it. It's just that everyone else has been hit so hard. And Mizzou was hit hard too, losing Tamar Bates, Caleb Grill, Josh Gray, Marquez Warwick, guys like that. Mizzou has their own holes. It's just they have comparatively less holes. And I believe Anthony Robinson and Mark Mitchell rank second and third in my calculations of returning players as far as being the best producers returning, which, that's notable because other teams don't have that.
So just some quick math here. Depending on if you want to use the 13 scholarship count or the 15 scholarship count, the SEC had basically available scholarships somewhere between 208 and 240. So Missouri obviously was at 15. They were flexing that rule a little bit. Other teams carried less, like Tennessee, I think only had 11 or 12 scholarship guys.
Arkansas, same way, even less.
Yeah,
actually.
Yeah. So this is just on what's available, right? 81 players are graduating or have expiring eligibility is maybe the better way to frame it. 81, right? There have been 63 transfers out of the SEC. So that's 144 players leaving rosters out of what did we say? We'll just say like 215, 220. I mean, it's like 65% of the SEC is leaving. Now, some of those vacancies are SEC players going to other SEC teams.
Sure, not many, but there are a few.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a few. You're right, not many. Missouri is sending all theirs to the ACC.
Finally, a reason to watch.
Yeah. Big Monday has a new meaning for us. So like that's a lot of turnover. There's only been like 12 NBA declarations. There's that signed 44 high school players. So we got 44 that are coming in. Transfers in right now we're at 60. Yeah, like it is. So for anybody who's not on Rockin' Plus, I have a SEC transfer tracker. If you're this curious about the other teams, like you can actually pull it up. It's the first post in the SEC transfer tracker thread. And it's just like these are just really amazing numbers. Auburn, 8 players graduating. Ole Miss, 8 players graduating. Texas A&M, 8 players graduating. Oklahoma, 7. Kentucky, 6. Tennessee, 6. Missouri, 5. Texas, 5. Alabama, 5. And then you get to like some kind of fun stuff like LSU. Hey, only 4 players graduating. Yeah, 7 players entered the portal. Vanderbilt, only 4 graduating. 7 players entered the portal. So like the turnover is hitting you no matter what. So the fact that, Missouri is sitting here with only 2 spots open, and we're going to get to that here shortly. Only 2 spots open, 5 graduations, 3 transfers out, 4 transfers in. Like they're sitting about as well as anybody in the league for finding that stability. Now, if you look at all like the preseason polls, you're still going to see Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee. And right now there's a lot of people that are just saying like, we trust like Nate Oates, we trust Bruce Pearl, we trust, Rick Barnes. Those guys are going to figure it out. And they generally do. Dennis Gates has to get to the point where he starts to get that trust. And I think this next team has sort of like the possibility of sort of building that trust, within the national expert level, I guess we'll kind of call it that. So with all that said, there are 2 spots remaining. let's talk about those 2 spots. Is it going to be 2
Give
spots?
the people what they want.
Yeah. The portal is still so the transfer portal is officially closed. There's still a possibility. It closed last night at midnight. We are recording this on Wednesday evening, so Tuesday night at midnight it closed. It takes a couple days for paperwork process. Still possible that players enter officially into the portal for another day, but for the most part, the portal's closed. Anybody who's in the portal right now, they can be recruited. Blah blah blah. Missouri's at a point where kind of looking at the breakdown of the roster. They've got 4 post guys. That's Nick Randall, a freshman, Trent Burns, redshirt freshman, Luke Northweather, who will be a junior, I believe a redshirt junior, if we're being honest, and Shawn Phillips is a senior. They've got a lot of combo forwards. I've sort of shifted a few guys around. We've got Jacob Cruz, Mark Mitchell, Javon Porter, Trent Pierce, all listed as combo forwards. That's another 4 guys. Cruz is probably more of like a true wing at this point. Anna Batang, another wing. And then you've got Ant at point guard. You got Seb Mack, who's kind of a combo guard. Aaron Rose, a point guard. Am I missing anybody?
T.O. Barrett,
combo guard. So that's kind of where things stand. As far as these last 2 positions, we're kind of thinking Missouri's probably just going to fill one, right?
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I think the plan
it depends. It always depends.
The idea is to maximize your 1 spot and get the best producer you can for that 1 spot. I do think there is some value in potentially holding on to that 15th spot for a while, and let me explain about that. The 15th spot, if I'm not misunderstood, the 15 scholarship limit is part and parcel with this new House settlement where they're trying to cap roster spots. So you get 15 spots, and you do not get any walk-ons beyond that. 15 is all you get. No more players than that. And there is a whole bunch of hubbub today that lawyers are interested in. You all aren't. So we're going to skip that. But Mizzou has filled 13. I think what the idea is to fill one of those spots now, like as soon as possible, or as soon as they find what they want in the transfer portal. But then you have a 15th spot available. And I think there's some thought, and mostly in my own head, about potentially holding on to that as opposed to filling it with another person who you don't perceive as being an option to be on the court next year. In the event that any of this whole players entering the portal without eligibility, if anything materializes with that down the road, then you have an additional spot to potentially grab a decent player that's looking for a home next year that otherwise would have been out of basketball by this point. Now, I don't know that that's the staff's thinking. That's my thinking. I do imagine that they will probably report to the first day of practice next year with 15 players. It's just that 15th spot. I don't know if it's going to be more of a walk-on, into the bench type guy, or if they're actively going to fill it. My thought is it's more now the former, but that could change. So the way I'm conceptualizing what's available in the portal right now, what Mizzou's looking at is for 1 spot.
It is.
That's the lawyer answer.
Yeah, it is interesting, because and this is sort of like where you get into, Dennis kind of joke a little bit with calling it the lab. He likes to get into the lab, and he likes to play, and he likes to have the reason he likes these deep rosters is he likes to see what lineups work. Sometimes you get weird lineups, and sometimes you get lineups that make 0 sense. But he's going to try it, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. especially like, in that sort of, preseason where they're just running through all the Q4 opponents. This is a roster already where, like, if you are setting like even a 10-man rotation, like, it gets interesting when you get to 10 or 11. Like, every year I do the, top 8. And even last year, like, every year I've done it since, like, Dennis has kind of, been the head coach. I always get pushback from people who are just like, oh, like, he's going to play more than 8. I'm like, I understand that, but there's going to be a ranking of who played the most minutes, who played the second most, and all of those things are going to be stacked, right? All the way from the top of the roster to the bottom of the roster. If you're on the roster, you're going to fall in there somewhere. And right now, like, you're sitting on 13 dudes, and it looks like 11, I would say, probably expect to play a fairly, and you can define major however you want, but a fairly major role on the team next year. I would be surprised if, Nick Randall is a heavy contributor. I would be surprised if Luke Northweather is a heavy contributor. All right, so that's like Aaron Rowe. I think we all think he's a guy who is going to take some time to sort of, really develop and kind of get back on the right track as far as his development is concerned. But that's still like that's a deep roster. If you're bringing in another guy, that's a guy who's probably going to be expecting to play, unless it's JV Brown Part 2, right?
Yeah, I would agree. And, when I look at the roster, I kind of look at it in 3 different groups. I've got the guards, which to their credit, they can all kind of flex in between whether they're playing on ball or off ball. Now, granted, some guys are better on, like Ant, some guys are better off, but I see a group of 4 there. As far as true wings, we'll call them, I see 2, Honor Boateng and Jacob Cruz, who I think is a more natural fit at the 3. And then up front, you just got this big jumble of guys. What is that? We're up to 7 guys between the 4 and 5 spot. I know, Mark, ideally you want to play him at the 4 position, and he's going to play a lot no matter what you call him. But as far as how those other spots fill in, are they going to play more traditional center like Shawn Phillips? Are they going to try and get more of stretch guys in there with Javon Porter, with Trent Pierce? Trent Burns is kind of neither of those things. He's a stretch traditional center, I guess.
Yeah.
So what they do there is going to be really interesting. But what, for the purposes of our conversation here, is what I do know is that they don't need another guy in that group that isn't an answer. You've got 7 guys. 1 of them is an answer. 6 of them are question marks to me. Some of them are small question marks. I think Javon Porter, we have a pretty good idea of what he's going to be, and that's not a bad player. With Trent Burns, it's a huge question mark. We have no idea what he's going to be. So I tend to say, like, let's just set those guys aside, and we'll figure that out this summer. Adding another guy to complicate matters isn't really going to help anything unless you can find a guy who I don't even know exists right now that is a bona fide, guaranteed starter at the 5. So that brings you to a wing or a guard. There's a debate both here and everywhere about whether it's more or whether it's better to bring in a guard or a wing. I personally believe that a guard who can shoot is the ticket, because I'm a little concerned, if we're being honest, about
we'd say a ball handler who can shoot. Like somebody,
right. What did I say?
And you said a guard, so
okay, ball handler. Yes.
Yeah, because I mean, technically, so Honor is a good example of so Honor is a wing, but Honor will play probably at least some at the 2, but Honor is not a ball handler, And
Not at all.
when I always say, like, the easiest way for me to quantify what a ball handler is you've got full court pressure. You're going to toss the ball to this guy, and you're going to trust him to bring it up. That's Ant. I think Sebastian Mack can be included in that. Like, a guy who's not going to turn the ball over. T.O. Barrett. Barrett's probably a little bit more of a combo right now, but you trust him to bring the ball up.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're talking about is a ball handler.
Right.
Yeah.
Someone who can dribble the ball without turning it over. That is, I think, ideally what you look for. I understand the thought process of, oh yeah, a wing who can shoot would be nice. Well, they're banking on Jacob Cruz being a wing who can shoot. They're banking on Honor Boateng being a wing who hopefully can shoot and can do other things as well. So I think even when you add those guys in, some of the guys that are in the 4 and 5 spots could slide down and theoretically play the wing. I mean, when you're talking about playing a Javon Porter and Mark Mitchell, what's preventing you from putting Trent Pierce on the floor as a wing? Yes, you don't have ball handling, but guess what? When it's Jacob Cruz or Honor Boateng, you don't have ball handling with them either. Right. That to me is the 3 spots the way Mizzou's constructed the roster right now skew more towards the 4 and 5 than they do the 1 and 2. They're not ball handlers. They're not playmakers with the balls in their hands. Whereas your guards, you've got guys who can do that, but you've got 4 of them, including a freshman. So when I'm looking at maximizing the roster or addressing the weaknesses, I'm looking at the 1 and 2 spots.
Yeah, I think I lean, like, I see the logic behind the wing, like adding another wing spot. I'm always a fan of having more guys who can handle the ball. Right now, it's Ant, T.O. and Sebastian Mack, and I always want 2 ball handlers on the floor. Now you can fudge that a little bit because you can always throw the ball to Mark Mitchell and he can bring the ball up. There's not many 4s and 5s who can guard Mark Mitchell full court and put pressure on him. To the point of him turning the ball over, which again is like kind of the point here, is you want somebody who can get the ball into the front court with no turnovers.
Throw Javon Porter into that group as well. But as far as like actual ball handlers, guys who are creating in the half court or guys who are having to defeat pressure full court, that's kind of my realm of what I'm looking at. And I don't trust Mark Mitchell to defeat a full court press. I don't trust Javon Porter to do it. And when you look at the guards, and we're talking on this topic, you've got Anthony Robinson, great player, love him. What has been his bugaboo? Foul trouble. Well, guess what? When it comes to the end of games, if you're in foul trouble, that's probably the most likely point that you're not in the game anymore.
Yeah.
T.O. Barrett, good player. Do you really trust him at the free throw line or having to get up shots late in the game as a jump shooter? Maybe not so much. Sebastian Mack, again, not a great jump shooter. So, to me, it's like I see the virtue of the wing and I see the virtue of even a 4 or 5, but I think the biggest need right now is someone who can make plays with the ball in their hands, passing, dribbling, and hopefully jump shooting, and that if that means it's a guard by definition, then that's who I want.
So we're going to end it there. By this point, at our next podcast, we may have an answer to what the coaching staff wanted. I think we have an inkling that they may not agree with us, but at least the 2 of us. I do see, the reasoning of maybe wanting a little bit more stability in the wing. Right now, it's Cruz, who's maybe not the most consistent, doesn't guard well, and Honor, who could be awesome, could be, but you haven't seen it yet. So we may know what they're going to do by the time we sort of reconvene here in a couple weeks. So with that being said, everybody go subscribe to Rockin' Plus if you're not already subscribed. Come see us in the forums. We're talking all this stuff all day long. we are basketball junkies, basketball sickos, and it is a lot of fun on there these days. So yeah, so we'll talk soon. We'll be back in a couple weeks. Watkins, thanks for hopping on. Everybody enjoy the rest of your Wednesday night. Thanks for tuning in.